Unsecured debt can be terminated. Legal foundations for debt resolution. Debts can be purged using the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, FDCPA. Credit history can be restored by leveraging the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA. Creditors can be defended against by utilizing knowledge of contract law, generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, court procedures, and the principle that banks do not actually loan money. Debt collectors can be challenged on the basis that an assignee cannot establish a contractual nexus to enforce a claim. The banking system and loan misconceptions. Banks are prohibited from loaning money. They cannot lend other depositors funds due to the matching principle under GAAP. Furthermore, they are restricted from risking their own assets due to Federal Reserve regulations. In order to accept a credit application or promissory note, banks must convert the customer's promissory note into a negotiable instrument, a check, and return it to the customer. Only banks can perform this conversion due to their monopoly on negotiable instruments. Essentially, it is the customer who generates currency and funds their own line of credit. The customer is the actual creditor and depositor, while the bank merely facilitates the transaction under the guise of a loan approval process. Defending against creditors. When dealing with a creditor that has not yet assigned the account to a debt collector, the objective is to either negotiate a new agreement or compel the account into collections, where legal protections are stronger. A creditor can be sent a notice of final payment, which, if undisputed in writing, serves as full satisfaction of the debt. If the creditor fails to respond or object, it becomes difficult for them to maintain a claim. When contacted by a creditor about late payments, it is crucial to document the caller's name, company, mailing address, phone and fax numbers, the date and time of the call. A request that all further communications be made only in writing. Following this, it is best to terminate the call and send a written request for written communication only. Handling persistent creditor contact. If phone calls persist, repeat the documentation process or file a complaint with your state's Attorney General's office. In most cases, this leads to the creditor assigning the debt to a collection agency. At this stage, the debt becomes subject to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, FDCPA, which imposes strict regulations on third-party collectors. Challenging third-party debt collectors. Debt assignment does not create a contractual obligation between the debtor and the third-party debt collector unless the debtor actively consents to a new agreement. Most third-party collectors lack a direct agreement with the debtor. Instead, they attempt to establish one through deception, tricking debtors into accepting new obligations. A debtor can counter this by sending a debt validation request, demanding proof of a written agreement, evidence of the debtor's consent, proof of consideration, payment or services provided. Collectors rarely possess these documents and, upon failing to validate the debt, often cease collection efforts. Escalating complaints against collectors. If a collector continues collection attempts despite failing to validate the debt, a complaint can be filed with the Federal Trade Commission, FTC. Including the FTC's address on a second validation notice often leads to a positive resolution, as many collectors prefer to drop the claim rather than face regulatory scrutiny.